everyone, welcome back to Talkin Guff with me, your host, Ruben Django Pouch. Let me just check one thing. Yeah, okay, I can live with that. So hey, everybody, welcome back to Talkin Guff. It's been a while since I've done a podcast. Episode 9 was the last one. In the interest of full disclosure, I did record an episode 10 with the help from of my wonderful cousin, Mr. Ben Barry, who provides the beautiful artwork that you see behind us. And it was about drugs and drug addiction and how maybe the parameters of addiction are changing, you know, in tandem with our technological revolution. And it's an interesting subject, and I just felt that I didn't give it enough. It was just sort of me banging on about smoking too much weed, and I didn't think it gave it enough oxygen or covered enough of the points that are worth talking about. And we will have an expert on as a guest to talk to us about this stuff, and so we're going to wait for that and do it properly. I also did a couple of... I've done this podcast already, but I've had some technical issues, so I'm redoing it in the hope that I've sorted said technical issues. I will say that the Rode Go radio mics are actually fairly shit. So anyone looking at them, they're not cheap. I wouldn't suggest buying them. I think you'd be way better off with two or whatever, a normal microphone. One thing I will say is that we had our first sort of interactive comment from a Mr. Philly Morris. He commented on episode 9 and he said maybe knock the weed on the head and look after yourself for a bit. And I assume he was sort of referencing the poor coping mechanisms that I employ from time to time and talked about on that episode. And you're dead right, Philly Morris. And it's something that... all I say is you're dead right. And yeah, knock the weed on the head, love yourself. That's sort of one of my credences. But at the same time, it's easier said than done. But anyway, we're back. We're here podcasting. Has anything happened in the interim since I last seen you? Yeah, DMX died. God rest his soul. May he rest in power. A serious recording artist. The real deal with some killer tunes. With a hood, with a hood, with a hood at. That has to be the most flagrantly homophobic tune I've ever actually heard. If you listen to the lyrics on that, it's fucked up. But anyway, rest in power, DMX. Someone else died. Prince Philip, the silly sausage. And Waterford Whispers had a headline that said, Greek immigrant living on benefits in the UK dies. And I was just like, there's another fucking perfect little headline from them crackers at Waterford Whispers. I mean, I suppose in one, you know, you could argue that let's not speak ill of the dead, and you would be right. But I suppose there's a part of me that's, because we know what my take on the British royal family is, so that part of me, should I say, is sort of going, well, fuck him a little bit. Here's a person who was touched by more wealth and privilege than any of the thousands of people who die on a daily basis in sort of war-torn and exploited countries around the world. And so here's a man who was a documented racist, cost a bloody arm and a leg to keep him in the lifestyle he was accustomed to, and all he really did as a job was sort of fly throughout the Commonwealth fucking indigenous underage peoples, probably. So yeah, maybe the world's better off without him. The Queen is probably not long for this world either, and that's going to be a mad one from a sort of cultural level, I suppose, or a social level. And I wonder then, I would like to think that maybe the royal family would take the opportunity to sort of eschew some of the draconian colonialist, sort of imperialist ideals or ideologues of their institution. But I don't think that that's going to happen. I think Prince William looks like he's mad for being a Windsor and being the king, and, you know, may in fact drink the blood of orphans. So I don't think anything is actually really going to change in that respect. But yeah, Prince Philip, huh? What else have we got here? I got new trainers and a new matching Adidas top, and I love them. I look at Nike Air Max 90s, and I think there's something tied to my childhood and never having them when they were of time. when it was the time that they were out originally. But the lines, whoever designed Nike Air Max 90s got the lines just perfect. They're amazing. I could sit and look at these puppies for like an extended period of time. But in spite of all my diatribes and my apparent awareness of the situation, I'm still indulging in consumerism, even though I know that it's propped up on the exploitation of low-wage workers around the planet. So I'm not really being part of the solution. But am I part of the problem then by default? And if so, am I as big a part of the problem as the likes of some of the people, like the CEOs of these companies and the people who benefit on a sort of exponential scale? Am I as bad as those people? Who knows? But definitely I'm not part of the solution, I suppose. Which is interesting because we're going to touch on some of that stuff in today's podcast. I had mentioned before how I thought potentially lockdowns could be advantageous to certain characters, and not necessarily then that there was a conspiracy at play to keep us locked down. But again, if you look at people with the wealth and power to influence the situation, is it working for them? And is it working for us? So where is that going to get us? Because we're now aware of a huge transfer of wealth that has happened to the tune of trillions of monies in the last 12 months, right? And so I suppose this time 12 months ago, when the company that I worked for were closing, the restaurant that I worked in, it was a big sort of multinational corporation, owned this restaurant that I worked in. And one of the things that I said to myself and other chefs that were working with me was like, don't worry, because the company we are working for, they love the system. It works for them. They can't afford not to be open, effectively. And I was sort of hanging on to the idea that, there couldn't be some sort of horrible dystopian new world order being ushered in, because surely we're already in the new world order. Surely this is a consumerist utopia for, big business. And so why would they want to change that system? Why would they not fight to keep that system intact? And I suppose then when we look at that transfer of wealth, it's now plainly obvious that as much money as they were making 12 months ago, they are making exponentially more money now. And therefore, is this system actually better for them? And then, yet again, will the system change? Will we get back to normal? I was having this conversation with Rob, actually, who used to do the podcast with us, and he got a bit animated with me, and I suppose what he was saying was like, well, what the fuck, Ruben? It's totally hopeless then. What are you talking like that for? And the point I'm making is that I don't think it's hopeless, but it could become hopeless. And we need to be aware of that, maybe, I feel. And I might be wrong about that. And again, I'm not saying that this is necessarily what was going on with him, but are we afraid of dealing or focusing or acknowledging these potential malevolent forces? And because malevolence is out there, and it's usually in the upper echelons of politics and big business. So I thought that was really scary. The one thing that was making me think that the lockdown wasn't really going to work for people is now making me think, oh, it will work for these people. And that sort of scares me a little bit, if I'm being totally honest with you. And again, I might be a bit of a paranoid whack job, but when I look at the certain situation, it makes me uneasy. It unnerves me. But also, like I was looking at, and you see quite often in the papers, especially in our wonderful, impartial media sources, you see these lists of rules for when traveling and, for all different manners of or aspects of our life. And one thing you see often is rules for when pubs are allowed to reopen. We remember this from last October. I certainly do, working in the service industry, and we're looking at that graph of sectors versus levels of restriction. So level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and how it affects the different sectors. And at one point we were working off level 3, but the hospitality sector was working off level 4, and it was being presented to us as level 3.5 or whatever the fuck it was. But one thing, I saw one of these said articles of a list of rules of things that can be done or not done when the pubs reopen. And it went through each level and it explains the restrictions in place for each level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But one thing I noticed that I hadn't noticed before, tacked on to the end of every restriction level, table service, outdoor dining, all these blah blah blah, on the end of every single one it said noise controls. And that's something I've never seen before. And I suppose part of me is going, how does noise affect the spread of coronavirus, and therefore why has it anything to do with any level of restriction? Why are we restricting or controlling noise in pubs and restaurants? How does it affect the spread of coronavirus? How is it beneficial to the fight against coronavirus? And so if anyone knows the answer to that, please let me know in the comments section below. And the other part of me is that there's a little, anti-authoritarian, distrusting, cynical part of me that says, no, noise controls, no. I'm not living in that world. I'm not living in a world where there's legislation against noise. It just doesn't seem right to me. It seems sort of, at the risk of sounding melodramatic, it seems sort of inhuman. The reason I touch on them is just to say, there's scary things I find about the lockdown. I don't think lockdown works. I think nature will always find a way, and I know that's probably a Jurassic Park quote, but I think it makes intuitive sense to me. It's like we put these lockdowns in place, and yet, the virus branches off into different variants, etc., etc., etc. So I don't think we're ever going to get away from coronavirus by locking down. And then when I look around, I think it's sort of advantageous to certain people disproportionately, not the normal, everyday, working class people. So we said already, the billionaires in this country alone have increased their wealth by 3.8 billion in the last 12 months. And so it's obviously working for someone. And again, that's not therefore it's a grand conspiracy, but I think that the types of people we are talking about don't look at the bigger picture. They look at their own greed and their own sort of career progress, and everything else is sort of collateral damage or fodder or irrelevant or not even looked at. And so, with that in mind, I was going to have a chat today about the vaccine. Not to sort of get into because I've said before I didn't want to get into an argument about coronavirus because I don't feel that anyone really knows the parameters. I certainly don't. And there's so much conflicting information out there, and there is lots of conflicting information. Not all of the information is given equal amounts of oxygen, but it's out there. And we'll talk about that in another little bit. The main thing I wanted to sort of talk about the vaccine was sort of, I'm wary about getting a vaccine, and I wanted to explain why I'm wary about that situation, not in order to sort of change anyone's mind or sort of flex on someone that I'm right and I have it figured out and no one else does. It's just like we just spoke about in the Death of Age of Conversation. I just wanted to be all right to have a conversation about the vaccine and to question certain aspects of it. And it's looking like it's obviously okay to take a vaccine, but it's getting increasingly not okay to take the vaccine. And I want to talk about, making sure that there's a safe place for both mindsets. And it doesn't seem at the moment, if you were to turn around and sort of question the narrative in any way, you're an anti-vaxxer or a conspiracy theorist, you're flaunting public safety, whatever it is. And I think that's an unhealthy place to be because, again, that just kills conversations. We don't give a fuck what you have to say, mate. You're an anti-vaxxer. And again, if you can sort of diminish what people think, then you can also diminish their rights and their liberties, their civil liberties, their inalienable freedoms. And so I've said that I'm wary about taking a vaccine, but the flip side of that, the flip side of that situation in my life is that I live at home with my mother, whom I love dearly, obviously. She is 65 years of age and she has 2 types of cancer. She has lung cancer and she has brain cancer. She was diagnosed with lung cancer over 2 years ago and brain cancer about 2 months ago. Now, she has been treated with a trial drug developed by a pharmaceutical company, and it had a great effect on her. I don't know if remission is the right word, but it definitely dissipated the size and intensity of her cancer in her lungs. It became treatable. And so she's been doing great for the last 2 years, and mad shout out, massive props to my mum, one of the strongest human beings I've ever met. But she was diagnosed then with brain cancer a couple of months ago, and it was a real shock to her, obviously. And the way she explained her situation, her feelings to me, was that she has cancer. She's worried the whole time about her cancer. It's creating a real level of anxiety, obviously, for her. I mean, if it was me, and I said this to her before, I'd be freaking out. I would be losing it. Honestly, 100%. When she got the brain cancer, she just was so anxious and upset about it, and it was eating up so much of her mental energy that she doesn't have the wherewithal, or doesn't have it in her to have to worry about coronavirus as well, because if she gets coronavirus, it could fucking kill her easy. And so her thought process is like, I'm getting the vaccine. And she got her first AstraZeneca jab maybe a month or so ago, and she will get another one in a month or so. And I totally understand where she's coming from, 100%, and I totally support and respect her decision to take the vaccine. That's no problem for me. And so there, I'm just trying to highlight the fact, or communicate to you people out there, that I'm not, like, by default an anti-vaxxer. Okay? Do you know what? I've just realised I really did want to touch on one other thing, and I'll come back to what I'm saying right now in a minute. I saw a thing, I suppose I wanted just to quickly touch on, because on Instagram there recently, I saw on someone's story a post or it was part of the story, and it was a meme. I think a meme is the right word to use. It was like a photo and text and stuff like that. But although I agreed with the sentiment of what was being said, there was parts of it that I just thought, well, I'll just read it to you. It says, nothing annoys me more than those, let's stop tearing each other down, let's stop the division, let's uplift each other people whenever there's a necessary discourse happening. Toxic positivity is also a silencing tactic. I agree with that statement, or that whatever it is, to a degree, and I don't want to, we shouldn't sort of belittle or besmirch serious social justice movements by going, would you calm down? Everyone's grand, just be sound to each other. But, like, if you take a point in case, like the US of A, the United States of America, which it's almost like a catalyst for trends. I've mentioned this before. Len had a great way of explaining it as well, but it's like a catalyst for trends that culturally, socially, politically, financially, that sort of leaches out into the world, right? The catalyst for the Black Lives Matter sort of protests in this country was the death of George Floyd. Now, obviously, that was in another country, but it resonated with people who are feeling the effects of racism, I suppose, in this country, and their supporters. And that is great. I love that. But I said before that one thing I noticed is that people aren't really looking for resolution. And I mean, we want to talk about healthy discourse. I'm all for healthy discourse when there is conflict resolution attached to it, especially amongst everyday working class people, right? In the United States, this year, in the last month, Dante Wright, I'm not 100% sure how to pronounce that name, was shot and killed in his car. And even the idea that it was a mistake, I meant to tase him, is a disgusting symptom of your broken system. And this is something I said before, your system is broken. And Donald Trump didn't break it. It was broken long before, if not decades before, Donald Trump showed his ugly face. And actually, people would argue, and they would be right in my opinion, that Donald Trump is a system or a byproduct of your broken system, is a symptom or a byproduct of your broken system. And like, we know that throughout history, this is what happens when people feel disenchanted. They elect populist leaders, and we do that actually a little bit even in this country. But I was always took exception to the idea or the narrative that the United States was in fact the land of the free and the home of the brave till Donald Trump got his dirty little feet under the table. And that's obviously a total load of bollocks. And then he was blamed for all these issues, and I'm not saying that he wasn't an incendiary or fuel for the fire, but he wasn't the problem. He was a part of the problem. And I always said, if you just focus your attention on him as the problem and not look at the underlying issues, don't look at the millions of people through the middle of your country who are totally disenchanted by your coastal centric economies and all the rest. And I suppose then when we see Dante Wright was shot and killed by a police officer, so that's an African American being brutalized by the people it paid, employed to protect and serve. We obviously also, because I speak about it, I'm going to have a little sip of this, saw a massive transfer of wealth. We also saw that the newly elected president, Joe Biden, the great white hope, is bombing the shit out of Syria. Now, the reasoning behind bombing the shit out of Syria and killing innocent people is a retaliation for attacks that happened, perpetrated in Iraq, apparently by someone in Syria, right? Obviously, I have a huge issue with America's foreign policy and how they have conducted themselves in the Middle East. And I suppose, Joe Biden is a fucking war criminal. He's an interventionist goon who's obsessed with the industrial military complex. He's obsessed with the, national security state. And he was sold to us the answer to all of America's problems. Whereas, for all the discourse, the healthy discourse, not the toxic positivity or whatever the fuck we call it, it's business as usual over in the States. African Americans are getting brutalized by the police. There has been a massive transfer of wealth, so basically the richest people in that country are getting richer to the detriment of the poorest people. That's something that's been happening, and it's that neo-capitalism that was born out of the States and that we've seen now leaking all over the world, destroying the planet and the people living on it. Couple that with the bombing of, poor countries in the Middle East, and it seems like it's business as usual in the States. And the thing I just find so disgusting about all of this is that so much hinged on this Black Lives Matter movement that was so important, and yet nothing. I don't see any level of outrage for the fact that your government continuously and consistently is bombing, countries of brown people around the world. Poor brown people are getting blown to bits, literally. When you look at that situation on either sides, from the attacks in Iraq to the retaliations in Syria, some rich white person who makes these ammunitions and owns the companies that create these ammunitions and firearms made money. That person made money while poor brown people were killed, blown to bits, literally. And we know that. That's not a conspiracy theory. And I find that interesting because when we get into what we're going to get into, you can sort of transpose that attitude and that sociopathic behaviour and go, well, why would we think that it's going to be any different in this circumstance? As I said already, I'm not fundamentally against the vaccine. My mum wants to get the vaccine. She feels like she's vulnerable. She feels like this will give her peace of mind where she can concentrate on the other problems in her life, ergo her cancer. And so I totally respect and support that decision. And again, I just want to say now that I respect and support anyone who wants to take the vaccine. But just as importantly, I think people who don't want to take the vaccine should be trusted and supported and at the very least, you know what I mean? Or no. And so, I think there should be a safe place to not want to take the vaccine. And I don't think we should allow these sort of negative, near defamatory taglines or labels be associated with people who don't. It doesn't make sense to me. And because, yeah, okay. So I don't really like the idea of the vaccine. All right? I don't trust all of the players involved. I don't trust the people producing it and their industry, and I don't trust the promoters, the politicians and the technocrats And I'll get into that right now. And again, let me just say again, I'm not saying all of this stuff in the hope that I change people's minds. Anyone can do whatever they want to do, and I don't believe I can change anyone's mind anyway. And I don't want to argue about it or tell someone they're wrong. I just think it's really important that we show some level of resistance to the narrative. And I, for one, will be showing some level of resistance to the narrative. And I hope that the indomitable human spirit will do the same. Because I think something very crazy could be happening. I'm not... Anyway, we'll get into it. Like I said, I don't trust the people producing the vaccines and their cohorts. And I'll get to them in a minute. Get to them. I don't know if we'll really talk about them that much, but I don't trust the promoters of said vaccine. Like I've said before, how I think Luke O'Neill, who seems to be the most fervent promoter of the vaccine rollout, the vaccine program in this country, I feel he has a conflict of interest because he in the past has received funding from Merck. He is in cahoots with other pharmaceutical companies such as Lilly White, etc., to develop and manufacture drugs. And as I understand it, he has acquired wealth from this relationship that he has with the pharmaceutical industry, and therefore I feel he has a conflict of interest, and I won't really trust everything that he has to say. I mean, at one point he said, just take them all, basically. He's like, I think there's reports out there that you should take the AstraZeneca, the Pfizer, take them all. I'm just like, did you just actually cut up the pie, Luke, in front of us and have it publicised in our national media outlet? Is that what just happened? Because it felt like that to me. And so I won't even get into much more Luke O'Neill. He's cool, he plays the guitar, he has a band, but he's not. He's a pharma whore. And therefore, for me, he's out of the circle of trust. But I suppose there is a Luke O'Neill character on an international, transnational sort of level who I'd like to talk about, and sort of, he seems to me to be the number one sort of global promoter of the vaccine and a vaccine program, a vaccine rollout to 7 billion people. And that is a Mr. Bill Gates. And now, again, what's tied into this sort of situation is if you mention the name Bill Gates, you can just get written off straight away as a conspiracy theorist or an anti-vax nutcase. And I just look at that situation and I go, well, why? Why do we trust this man so much? And why are we, in fact, willing to defame and be derogatory towards people who want to question his motives? Because you want to talk about a conflict of interest. Here's a person with a huge conflict of interest. Here's a person who is heavily invested not only in the pharmaceutical companies producing the vaccines, but in the ideologue that vaccines are the future. Like this idea that we're going to replace health with vaccines. Again, I don't have a problem with vaccines per se, but when I look at sort of malevolent businesses manipulating the situation, this happened before coronavirus as well, to suit their own gains, then I'm sort of like, yeah. And if obviously Bill Gates has been knocking around with the likes of GlaxoSmithKline and Merck and Moderna and all of these companies for a long time. He seems to have a level of arrogance about him that is almost akin to a messianic complex. And I mean, it's no coincidence to me that self-proclaimed savior, that arrogant piece of shit, is the son of a millionaire lawyer who sat on the board of eugenics. Go look into eugenics and tell me that environment, because you see, like, go and listen to a lady called Vandana Shiva talk about what Bill Gates has done to the agricultural system in India, and just about his attitude towards, 1,000-year-old techniques and technologies. And it's disgusting, really. It's arrogant. It's neo-imperialist or neo-colonialist almost. And he did the same thing with the agricultural system in Africa. And he gets to do these things because he has loads of money. He gets to leverage governments to do whatever he wants to do through money. That's what he's doing. And he destroyed, like, his idea to turn Africa and India into, like, agricultural economies that are much more efficient. And you hear him, he's like going, well, I have the superior technology and superior seeds. It's like, you don't know anything about farming, mate. You don't have a clue. You think, and I mean, he's now trying to... This guy is not a good guy, all right? And go and look at what Vandana Shiva has to say about him. Go look at the fact that he's trying to deregulate the GMO thing in Europe. And that's bad news for everyone on planet Earth except the shareholders of these companies. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's a fact. Another thing that gets put out there by sort of mainstream media that it's laughable to question the likes of Bill Gates, because look, he's a philanthropist. Here's the richest man on the planet, gave away all his money in the 90s, and that's the sort of bedrock of people's argument for Bill Gates. Why would this philanthropic guy want to be in any way malevolent? It's just like, fucking shut the fuck up, man. This is a person who accumulates wealth. He's not a philanthropist. He is an expert in the accumulation of wealth. And the other thing about it is that his wealth has increased fourfold since he gave it all away. How does that how does that not make people go, what? Because since Bill Gates gave away all his money in the 90s with Warren Buffett, like, that's not what these guys do. Don't show some resistance to that. Sorry, and I don't mean to be too hot-headed, but for me, I just be like going, that's not what these people do. I'm going to show some resistance to their own narrative. And when you look into it, it turns out that these philanthropic endeavors that billionaires are taking part in, like the likes of Zuckerberg, Resnick, Buffett, and Bezos, these lads are now giving away their money, but they're not. They're holding it in these crooked sort of holding accounts, DAFs and LLCs that grant these people or that money sort of tax immunity, grants them the same sort of tax status as charitable organisations. But in turn, those companies, those people are not beholden to actually give any of that money away. They're not obliged to actually donate any of the money that they enjoy tax immunity on, that they enjoy charitable tax status on. So it's total smoke and mirrors bullshit. And the most undeniable, inarguable point in case for that is Bill Gates has increased his wealth fourfold since he gave it all away. So it's bullshit. And therefore, if that's the way that someone like that is willing to operate, why would I then entrust them with my health? Doesn't make sense to me. And again, it's a really, you can't really say that without being labelled a vaccine, an anti-vaxxer, or conspiracy theorist, or whatever the fuck it is. And I suppose another major, fuck off Bill Gates. Other fervent promoters, because one thing I'm sort of going, well, when did this happen? Initially we locked down because we thought that the coronavirus was going to be a disease, a virus, the likes of which we had never seen, near death plague or black plague status, you know what I mean? Kill half the population of the planet. We now know, that that's not what it is. In fact, we've known that for quite some time. And so then the narrative changed to, well, we need to keep pressure off the health system. And let me just then explain why I don't trust our own institution, our own government. And it sort of starts with that one, is that we live in a country with 5 million people with sort of low demographics and a GDP of 300 billion. It should be easy by sort of global standards to govern this country for those reasons that I've just mentioned. And yet, we had a Minister for Health who was paid upwards of €150,000 a year, I think, incapable, unqualified to do such a job. He was Minister for Health. He's now Minister for Higher Education, and I think it's important to note that he has no higher education himself. Strange, that one. But anyway, this man, Simon Harris, was Minister for Health, and in his tenure, the outpatient list grew by 150,000 people, about 33%, right? He's getting paid exponentially, extortionately to do this job. And so he obviously can't do it. He's incapable of doing it. And now we are destroying the livelihoods of millions of people in this country. And we're destroying our own economy just to not put focus on the fact that this man was glaringly inadequate. You know, he wasn't fit for purpose. And so now to sort of take the focus off that fact, and he got paid a fortune to do a job he couldn't do, we have to fucking destroy everyone else's lives and jobs. And so for me, it's gone from deaths, when that's not a thing, it's gone from cases or pressure on the health service, which is a total fucking fallacy, in my opinion. And other people would argue, well, he inherited a bad system, or but he inherited it from Leo Varadkar, who went on to become Taoiseach, and he was paid upwards of €200,000 a year, and yet wants to promote himself as one of us, in the struggle, just like the rest of us, by posting photos of his €80 steak dinner boxes to Instagram. It's like, what fucking planet are you living on? How distorted from the reality are you? And so if those people are willing to fucking put the kibosh on us for their own career and political gains, what are we even having a conversation about? We live in a wealthy country with a small population and limited demographics, and yet this time last year there were 10,000 people living in temporary accommodation, some of which had full-on jobs and everything. And not that that makes it any more whatever, not that we should care more about the people living in temporary accommodation who actually go out and work, because there's, it's a shitty situation for everyone in it, and there are so many parameters involved. But when you see that it's massive numbers and people who have steady incomes, you think that's negligence on the part of whoever was Minister for Housing. And that situation has disappeared. We don't talk about that anymore, because all we are concentrating on is coronavirus and the lockdowns and the deaths and the numbers. Those people didn't go away. That's still total negligence on the part of our institution, and yet we're entrusting these people with sort of traversing a pandemic, a health crisis. And are we going to trust these people to have our best interests at heart when the financial reckoning of this situation is upon us? No fucking way. No way will they have our best interests at heart. They never will. They never have. Micheál Martin was there when they agreed to bail out the banks in 2008. He was in the Haughey administration. He was in the Bertie Ahern administration. So we know historically where his allegiances lie, all right? And it's not with the working class people. I think then, because like I said, these guys are bunglers, and they do whatever they have to do to take focus off or to sort of pass the buck. On numerous occasions, we've seen it. These actual people and the sort of the party's institutions that they come from, right? And another thing that I never hear these people say, from Luke O'Neill to Tony Holohan to our Minister for Health, etc., Tonsta, no one in a place of authority that I've seen says anything about general health. Do you have the appropriate vitamins and nutrients in your body? Take your garlic tablets, your zinc. Are you eating correctly? Are you limiting the amount of beige food? No, everyone's on the takeaways. There's another thing, there's 62 takeaways in this town in Bray where I live. In fact, there's 69 today. And it's all bad for you. And it is all bad for your health. And having bad health is not good for the coronavirus situation. But no one discusses that on a ministerial or government level that I've seen. No sort of, I hear ads all the fucking time on the radio for the vaccine, but I never hear an ad going, take your vitamin D, take your vitamin C, eat your greens, do some exercise. In fact, if you say that, and there is evidence out there to support the fact that taking 3,000 to 5,000 milligrams of vitamin D every day, taking 2,000 milligrams of vitamin C, ensuring that appropriate nutrients are in your body and being healthy, there is staggering evidence to say that that will really improve your chances when it comes to coronavirus. And we know that because it's all linked to our immune system. The more we look after ourselves, the better we're going to be in this situation. And I don't think it's any coincidence that the most unhealthy motherfuckers on planet Earth in the US had a huge number of deaths, and there was a huge correlation between obesity and these deaths. And again, that's never discussed, it's never talked about, but yet the point of conversation which seems to be happening all the time is, this is healthy. This little thing we made and we're making loads of money off and is indemnified by governments, this is healthy. Come on. It will be these same ministers, members of government that I've just spoken about, who I don't trust, who I feel live in a distorted reality far removed from that of normal everyday people such as me and you potentially. Those people are going to push for a vaccine passport, right? And for some people it might seem fairly harmless to have vaccine passports, especially maybe for those who intend to take a vaccine. But I don't think it's harmless. And I think one just really easy way is that it does create a two-tier society. Whether you like it or not, it does do that. Of course it does, because you're setting up a system, a database, which will note whether people have complied or not with the vaccine situation. And why would you want that? Why would you want to make the distinction between people who have and haven't had it on a government level, unless you wanted to infringe with one or the other of those people? It doesn't make sense to me. Certainly domestically. I mean, whatever about international travel, and I don't really give a fuck. I'll just go on holidays in Ireland for the rest of my life. But when you start to see it come in, and like for going to the pub and the shops, and if they're going to have a separate entrance in Trinity College for people who have the vaccine and don't have the vaccine, that is fucking bad news for society. That is bad news for human behaviour, for the human spirit. I mean, come on, obviously. Or no, sorry, even that's like going, come on, because I'm not trying to be like that. I'm just saying this is what I feel. Alright, maybe I'm saying that to myself. Come on, Ruben, be real here. But when I look at that vaccine passport stuff, like, I don't want to take a vaccine, and I don't think there should ever be a situation, even on a temporary basis, where you can't come to the pub right now, or you can't get on that bus right now, or you can't go into that Lidl right now, or whatever it is. That should never happen, because I feel like it'll be sold to us on a temporary basis. It'll become entrenched in society like these things always do. The Patriot Act is just a really easy point in case, most recent maybe. And it'll then turn into this sort of infringement of liberties and rights. And that is not a place we want to be, in my opinion. I don't see how anyone could think it is. You know, taking a vaccine, we had a referendum in this country about abortion a few years ago, and one of the main sort of arms or limbs of that was body autonomy, and that's 100%, like, we obviously all know that that's an important thing, and the decision to take or not take a vaccine lies specifically and only with the individual, and I don't think anyone should have to say whether or not they have. What's the fucking point? I don't know. I don't trust it. And I think it's a really obvious way to divide society, and divided we will fall. The people I'm talking about, the things they promote, like the ministers and Luke O'Neill and Tony Holohan, and the people who are in line with the narrative, in line with what we have to do to get rid of coronavirus, etc. Those people and their points of view, and again, I never see them talk about health, but where all of that is communicated to us, I suppose, is through mainstream media, the likes of RTE, the Irish Times, the Irish Examiner, the Independent, etc., etc., etc. And one thing I notice, and I've noticed this obviously before, like all of this stuff I'm talking about, I think we've noticed was happening, and I was certainly unhappy with it previous to coronavirus. And now that coronavirus is a thing, it seems that all of these things I'm talking about were sort of fucking kicked into overdrive. My point is that the only narrative we hear from our mainstream media is the narrative: we have to social distance, we have to lock down, we have to XYZ, we have to take a vaccine, we have to stop questioning the narrative, all of this stuff. It comes from mainstream media, as I said, and I find it to be all very weighted, bias, like not very journalistic, and that for me is a red flag. It's an alarm bell, because I feel that oxygen is only given to one narrative, and anyone who has an opposing thought process or wants to engage in opposing discussions is not given any oxygen. There's no room for you. We don't want to hear it, and actually, more than that, not only is oxygen not given to opposing narratives and ideals, but those people with opposing narratives and ideas are smeared in these media outlets. They're made to look stupid, and that's a tool to make you feel stupid about yourself for questioning the narrative. It's also a tool to make you afraid to question the narrative, because if you do, you're fucked. Like, they're gonna have you. A few examples of those weighted articles, and then we'll get into some smearing stuff. Like, even I saw an article there the other day where Leo Varadkar was offering a stark warning to anyone who refuses the AstraZeneca jab, and told them they'd be put to the back of the queue, right? Now, just really quickly, obviously, and I'll get into this in a bit, we know nothing about these vaccines. The parameters for our understanding of vaccines in the past are not the same now. And that's not a conspiracy theory, that's a fact. We're only in stage 3 of these vaccines from a testing point of view. Like, seriously rushed from a testing point of view. And they're different to all other vaccines. They're the mRNA, so there's some sort of gene therapy job going on there. Again, I'm not saying, so therefore it's bad, because I know what I'm talking about. But what I do know is that the parameters are different. We've never been in a situation like this before, where we're using these types of vaccines, where they haven't gone through the usual recommended sort of trials, and so we're in totally new territory. And I find then, and the AstraZeneca, now it turns out that there is a direct link, rare or not, there is a direct link between the AstraZeneca jab and blood platelet issues and clotting in the brain, right? There is a direct link to that. It might be rarefied, but it's there. And the thing about it is that at this early stage, we don't know how rarefied it is, but we do know it's there. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's not an anti-vax sentiment. That's a fact. Even to the point where in this country, and loads of other countries, the AstraZeneca jab will not be administered to people below the age of 60 years of age. And that you can't even question that narrative, or can't on that basis refuse that jab for fear of being put to the back of the queue. We're diminishing any sort of issue you might have, any concern, back of the queue. Do you not see how malevolent and how coercive that is, and how actually it's against the law to coerce people into taking medicine they don't want to? That's international law. It's in the fucking Nuremberg Code. Alright? And so for me, I just think that stinks. I think, who is this piece of shit to threaten people for their fears? It's fear. And you want to allay that fear. If you have any evidence to the contrary of that fear, then give it to us. Don't just say, you'll be down the back of the queue if you don't shut the fuck up. Another thing I saw in the Irish Times was an article about how thousands of emails had been sent to the European Parliament with regards to the vaccine rollout, and fears people had tied to this stage 3 untested vaccine. Now, the headline in the Irish Times was anti-vax deluge of emails. Now, just as equally, the headline for that article could be thousands of concerned people send email to European Parliament. But that's not what it is. It's an anti-vax deluge. And for me, that language is so obviously weighted. It's near propagandist. Like, for me, that's what I look at that. I just like going, who is this piece of shit that wrote that article? And anyone out there writing articles like that for those aforementioned publications, you should be fucking ashamed of yourself. You should have a sort of journalistic oath, some level of integrity. Not just to be first, not just to do what the institution asked you to do, but to report the news, you know? And I said there to sort of pander to or to do what the institution wants you to do. Obviously, then people start going, oh, Jesus, what's the story with that AstraZeneca jab? How come you can't give it to people below 16? Could I get a blood clot and die? And these are very real and obvious questions that people would ask in this situation. And I saw that, and like, if this isn't a fucking think piece for the coalition by the Irish Times, then I don't know what is. But it was like Q&A. What are the side effects of AstraZeneca jab? Who, why, what, where, whatever. And one of the first things they said is like, can it cause blood clots? And it's just like, yeah, there is a direct link. It's rarefied, but there is a direct link. And actually, and here's some, it said that if you were between the ages of 24 and 36, which I just am by the skin of my bollocks, that you are 2 times more likely to die from coronavirus than you are to develop complications from taking the vaccine itself. I was like, I don't like those odds. I don't like those odds. You know, I don't feel... Because here's another thing. It's like we've got into this idea that it's like everyone has to take the vaccine. But only sick people, surely, or people vulnerable to the situation should take it. My brother is going to take the vaccine. He works for the United Nations. He's going to take the vaccine. But the interesting thing about his standpoint is he says, in his own words, he's taking a leap of faith. And he would agree with what I have to say. He would agree that the system is broken, that the companies creating these vaccines are disreputable. But he says he's taking a leap of faith because he works on the ground on a grassroots level with the sort of doctors who develop these vaccines. And I don't think that those guys are malevolent characters whatsoever. But I think that they have a conflict of interest because they receive funding from these companies. Like in Oxford and Cambridge, they're getting hundreds of millions of pounds from the pharmaceutical companies. Like, it's massive money. Massive money is being generated by this thing. And again, when there's massive amount of money and little transparency, I don't trust the situation. But my brother is taking a leap of faith, and I fully respect his leap of faith, but I suppose I found it surprising given the fact that he agrees with a lot of what I said, and yet he's taking this leap of faith, not in the people he knows who create the vaccines and will have to work within the constraints of the situation, but he's taking a leap of faith in the companies themselves, and I have no faith in those companies, so I will not be taking that leap of faith. And I suppose his thing is he feels we have a moral obligation. That's how Joe Biden sells bombing the fuck out of Syria to you. It's liberation. It's the greater good. It's a moral obligation to fix to fix that place, fix that situation. But that in itself is colonialism. The arrogance to sort of wade in there and I'll fix that. Same with Bill Gates and his neo-colonialist ideals. And I meant to fucking trust this piece of shit. Like, it's just obvious, for me, should I say, when I look at that system situation, even if I don't know all the parameters and intricacies of it, I'm like, that's tilted. It's not tilted for me. And so do I trust it? Will I go along with it? You know, why is it always people in positions of power and wealth and privilege telling people like me how they have to live their lives, what they have to do for the greater good and the liberation of X, Y, and Z? Bollocks. For me, I think that's bollocks, and I don't trust it, and I will be taking no leap of faith. I have no faith in these people. I said there that the people that not only do, like, you know, I discussed there that the news outlets I'm talking about give no oxygen to opposing narratives, to opposing sides of the story, and there will always be opposing sides to the situation. And there are people out there who say the pressure being put on the virus by lockdowns is creating mutations, variants. And I suppose I don't have the prerequisite qualifications. I'm not a virologist or an immunologist or a vaccinologist or any ologist, a bollocksologist maybe, but I don't have the prerequisite qualifications really to understand. But I suppose on an intuitive, instinctual level, that makes sense to me. What that guy just said to me makes sense to me. And so that same person would say it is really dangerous to administer a vaccine in the midst of a pandemic that has variants, and the reason being because we've developed our vaccines on one certain protein spike, etc., etc. I don't know if this guy is right, but I think it's interesting, and I equally think that in our nationally syndicated media outlets, that guy should be given some sort of oxygen. And I'm not going to say who that is, and there are other instances of people arguing what we're doing, and they have PhD in front of their name as well, but they're given no oxygen. And I'm not going to name names here because not only are they given no oxygen, they're smeared. And I don't want to sort of open myself up to someone being able to go, oh, well, that guy's a fucking this, that, and the other. It says it here in the Irish Times that he's a crackpot. And again, not because I feel like, not for my own pride or anything, but because if I think what this person is saying is appropriate and important for other people to listen, to make an informed decision on what they want to do with themselves, then I don't want to sort of, if I say a name, someone will just straight away maybe talk shit about that name, and then another person, rather than look into it for themselves, because that's how we really learn this shit as well as we do it for ourselves. I just don't want anyone to give anyone the opportunity to go, what Ruben's saying is bullshit because that personally referenced is this, according to the Irish Times or whatever, BBC or whatever. So I'm not going to name any names. You go out and have a little look for yourself. Like, people are actually upset. They're actually offended when you want to question the narrative, and they scream at you, public safety. And I think that has something to do with mankind's, and this is definitely something that's gotten worse the further, the more advanced we've become. We have an innate inability to deal with death, I think, en masse. We're not into it. And I'm not either. I get it. It's a terrifying prospect. But I think we need to get more comfortable with that situation, because what I feel has happened here is we have allowed our fear of the inevitable, the only inevitability of this world. We have allowed our fear of that inevitability to sort of get us pushed down. Like, I feel like this is not good enough. This sort of half-life where the only things that were left was work and bills and listening to dickheads talk shit, on the radio and on the television. That's all we got left with. Everything else got fucked out, thrown out with bathwater. And I'm just like, this is shit. I feel like this is shit. And I think it's going to be shit for my son. It's going to be shit for all his mates. And if we don't deal with it now, it's going to become entrenched. It's just it'll just be life. And if the people who are benefiting from this situation get to go on benefiting exponentially, what will there be left for the rest of us? So, I do believe that media outlets smear people with opposing narratives. You can go and have a look. It's happened in this country for definite. I won't get into it with you. One person I will say, because he's not in this country, I suppose, he's sort of international icon or international level, is a Mr. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Now, for me, I think Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a total hero. He's obviously the son of Robert F. Kennedy, the nephew of John F. Kennedy, and he's really fucking cool, in my opinion. I started to get into Robert F. Kennedy before coronavirus, maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. He was always saying some interesting stuff about the CIA. I'm obsessed with the CIA. And if you hear about what he has to say, he does an episode of Hotboxing with Mike Tyson, and the stuff he says about the CIA is fucking mind-boggling. It's great. I think he's a really interesting character. He's lived a life and seen things and been part of a political sphere that we would know nothing about, have nothing about, but he didn't go into politics, you know what I mean? He just sort of, it's as if he got all the learning without actually going into it. He is an environmental lawyer who has, because here's a really interesting thing, is now he's gone. He's not on Instagram anymore, kicked off. He's not on Twitter anymore, kicked off. And he was kicked off for promoting anti-COVID fake news, basically. If you Google Robert F. Kennedy Jr., go to his Wikipedia page, maybe the first two sentences of his Wikipedia page says something like, it doesn't say anti-vaxxer, it says anti-vax advocate and conspiracy theorist. That's the first thing it says. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is an American anti-vax advocate and conspiracy theorist. And then blah, blah, blah. He has been removed from Instagram because of these apparent indiscretions for the apparent promotion of fake news. If you go scroll down that Wikipedia page and go to his life and his career and look at his resume, look at what this man has been doing, not for his own ends, I don't think. Obviously, he does all right for himself. He's one of the Kennedys. He's probably rich by default. But he's an environmental lawyer who has been bringing big businesses to court for the last 35, 40 years. For me, he's a defender of the earth, defender of the people of the earth. If you go through his resume, you just like going, it keeps going on and on and on about all these great altruistic things he's done for the planet and the people living on it. How he's, held to rights some of the biggest, most negligent companies on the planet. And another thing is, when you start to see all the people he went up against and why he went up against them, you start to get an idea of how negligent the corporate world is. And that, considering where these vaccines are coming from, is a thing I think might be worth our while taking a closer look at. But even like that, the juxtaposition of those first two sentences followed by what the man has actually achieved and done with his life for 35, 40 years, it just doesn't add up to me. It just doesn't add up. Why is a person who has been chasing the truth, bringing to rights fucking lying pieces of shit companies that destroy waterways and indigenous lands all over America, why would that man suddenly lose his fucking marbles? It doesn't make sense to me. He has more experience, first-hand experience with the sort of malevolent malpractices of big biz than anyone else out there. He is more surely, do you get what I'm saying? And then all of a sudden, he's censored. Not only do we not agree with what he's saying, we won't give him a platform to say it. He's not allowed to say that. And that, my friends, is censorship. And that is dangerous shit. And people can justify it or validate that in any way they want, and the way they will validate it is like going, well, it's really dangerous to be promoting anti-vax or anti-vax or conspiracy theories regarding coronavirus. But what they're actually saying, for me, when I look at it, it's actually really dangerous for someone to fucking throw a spanner in your works because you're making loads of money out of it. It's dangerous for you. It's dangerous to the people that this is an advantage to, and that is not me. So, who do I want to align myself with? Let's just touch then quickly on the players of this situation, or the environment of big business. And big pharma is obviously a massive part of capitalism, because that's what it is. It's a business. And I think that when there is massive amounts of money involved in situations and there is evidence to support this thought process of mine, I think when there's massive amounts of money involved, the care or the good of normal everyday people goes out the fucking window. We talk about Teflon, DuPont, the tobacco industry. Look at all of the people destroying, like I said, the waterways and indigenous lands in America that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has brought to court, sued successfully. Go look at their practices and tell me that they don't sort of write off, or that they don't consider the negative effects, the detriment of normal people to be sort of collateral damage, because that's what they look at. And you can apply that thought process across other industries. I think at some point in the car industry, when they knew that there was faults that could lead to the death of people, if the money, it's the classic Fight Club thing, but that's a real thing. If X doesn't equal Y over Z, then they don't do a recall. Even something as not as innocuous as the record industry, but this is just because this is relatable, and maybe you can understand this, or we could understand this and say, right, so that's, I suppose the lads in making all the money don't give a fuck, do they? They've no integrity. When the likes of Ed Sheeran releases Shape of You, and it's got a direct melody rip from TLC No Scrubs, the record company knows that. They know they're going to be sued for copyright infringement. They know that. And they know they will pay out up to 25, maybe 50% of all the money earned from this hit. But when you're dealing with Ed Sheeran and a smash hit like Shape of You, 50% of that is good. It's a good fucking day's business. And so they're not... My point is that they don't look at the situation and go, oh, we can't do that. We don't. From an integrity standpoint, they're going, no, let's do it. Even if we have to give half of the money we make from this away for copyright infringement, we're fucking winning. Like, it's such a smash hit that any percentage of the profits is a win. You know, when Sam Smith releases "Won't You Stay With Me," they know that's a Tom Petty ripoff. And obviously this has nothing to do with what I'm talking about, but my point is, like, even when they know, they still want the money. The integrity goes out the window because 50% of this money is worth it. Transpose that sort of attitude onto the pharmaceutical company. And like, if they make, like, there's claims out there, and this is just one instance, that Lily White knew that Prozac made you more suicidal. And they release it anyway because it's worth loads of money to them. And they get stuck in these situations where, like, there could be an issue with that. Let's just project what we'll make from it. Let's project what we could potentially pay out in lawsuits and settlements. We're still going to do it. Not like, oh, there could be a problem to general people's health. Oh, we can't do it then. Because that's not what these places are. They're not doctors or healers. It's a fucking multi-billion-dollar business. Pfizer, AstraZeneca, BioNTech, Moderna, Merck, GlaxoSmithKline, Johnson & Johnson. They're fucking multi-billion-dollar businesses. And the CEO of those companies, his job is not to heal the world. Now, not necessarily. His job is not to kill the world either. His job is to create revenue for the shareholders. His job is to satisfy the shareholders. That's it. That is it. And the only way you satisfy your shareholders is with money. Do you think any of the shareholders of these companies, the three players that are producing the vaccine even, do you think any of the shareholders of that company give a fuck whether or not the vaccine works? No, I don't. I think all they look at is their bottom line. You know, these companies that we're talking about obviously create a lot of money. We know that lots of money breeds sort of criminal negligence. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of points in case to support that. What I'm saying there, we know that these situations breed criminal negligence. And when we look around, like, even you look at we said it before about the technology industry, that, like, our phones and all the stuff, and I spoke again earlier on about my runners and all, that's propped up on slave labour and low wage income and the exploitation basically of poor people. And what if then you could transpose that onto, like, these companies are on the verge of making, if not making, having, or have made in the last 12 months, billions and billions of euros from the vaccine rollout. Like, it's the fucking biggest wet dream these people could have ever had. And again, I'm not sort of saying then there's a grand conspiracy in place to create a virus, and I'm not going that far at all. I'm just saying that it's advantageous. The vaccine rollout is extremely advantageous to these companies. We have seen in the past when, you know, great amounts of money are involved in these situations, I don't matter. You don't matter in these situations. The only people that matter is who it affects in a positive way. And they're going to keep doing that. And here's a real main sore point that I have about these vaccines. And this is a thing that is only new. This is a trend of the vaccine companies or the vaccine programs that we have now. The trend is indemnification, right? And that's a thing that happens in no other situation, no other industry on the fucking planet. Like, if I'm a chef, if I poison you, you know, because I didn't stick to the Food Safety Authority Ireland remit, there's recourse for that. You know, you could sue me. You could sue the restaurant I work for. I'm in no way indemnified. And that's just like for me, or just transposing that onto my industry, what I do for a living, I just think that's mad, isn't it? That's mad. Especially considering these, because let me just maybe say ways in which the indemnification thing backfired on us recently. Is that for the swine flu epidemic or pandemic or whatever it was in 2009, they created a drug was created and administered called Pandemrix. And it was not sufficiently tested. I think it was also a stage 3 drug. And it was rushed through the final stages and administered to people. And as Tony Houlihan says in a 2012 interview with the Irish Examiner, effectively he says the pharmaceutical companies had them over the barrel. Not only did they have to pay and he says this, whatever it is they wanted, we had to take the indemnification as well. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, Pandemrix, which was administered to about 30 million people in Europe, 30 million only, Pandemrix had a negative effect, in a serious negative effect on 100,000 people, and that's something like that's 3%. Am I wrong about that? And I'm pretty sure that 100,000 people we're talking about. I'll have to look into this, but basically a huge number of those people developed narcolepsy and acolepsy. Narcolepsy is where you fall asleep all the time. Acolepsy is where your muscles fall asleep the other time. It is a hardcore level of brain damage that happened, and so then our government paid for it. They indemnified the company that made it. It brain damaged loads of people, fucking ruined their lives and the lives of their loved ones and the carers, they're now carers, etc., whatever the situation is. And then so there is recourse for those people. They get to sue the state. So the state paid for it, and now we have to pay the settlements because the company was indemnified. And that is to the tune, in that one instance, of hundreds of millions of euro that me and you will pay. So, I mean, that's dodgy, isn't it? It's dodgy. If the dodgiest person in your town, here's a little analogy, like if you got a guy to do work for you, like a builder, and he did a bad job, you're not going to tell your mates to get him. You're not going to get him again. If the dodgiest motherfucker in your town, like the most malevolent character in your town, is trying to sell you a health drink, and it costs a fortune, it's like a fucking unlabeled can of piss, you're not going to drink that. If you go into the shop and there's just like this, hey, you want this, mystery can of piss, costs €1,000, it might sustain your health, but it might actually kill you. But either way, we want nothing to do with it. Are you going to buy that? You're going to spend €1,000 on that? No, you're not though. Why don't we apply that same sort of, because that's how we deal with people on a parochial level within our community. When they treat us like shit, or when they display malevolent, sort of behaviour, we disassociate with them. So why can't we apply that parochial mindset onto a far more fucking amplified situation, set of parameters, onto far more toxic characters? Why don't we do that? Why do we just go, yeah, okay, no problem? Again, I think it's our innate fear of death, or our inability to deal with that inevitability. Skadoosh. Again, I suppose I've been sort of bashing the whole situation a bit, but all I'm trying to do is say, like, I'm not just flippantly going, and whatever, trying to annoy someone by going, I'm not taking a vaccine, but for the fact that I don't feel like I need one from a health perspective, I don't trust the people, and all the stuff I've just talking about. I suppose I'm not, again, trying to argue with anyone. I'm just saying, for these reasons, I don't want to take a vaccine, and I want to make sure in our society that there's a safe place for my thought process. Because there's other people like me, and I would be very careful about going down a sort of road of hardcore division, especially when at the crux of this situation someone's making a load of money. Remember what we said about the bombs and all, and that what actually happened was poor people died while rich people made money? What if this is something a bit like that? Because I tell you, right, here's a bit of an interesting thing, and I'm probably going to wrap it up on this one, is that AstraZeneca and Pfizer, right, in around 2012 to 2015, those two companies saw the expiration of their heavy hitting patents, Nexium, etc., etc. They're hits, you know, they're top selling drugs. The patents on these drugs were expiring in and around 2012 to 2015. There's an article, in fact, in the Irish Times in 2017 explaining that Pfizer is on the verge of losing billions as a result of the expiration of their patents. Generic pharmaceutical companies in China and places like that are going to start making these drugs for a lot less money. And by default, the companies that we said that are now making these vaccines are going to lose billions in revenue stream. I said before that these are businesses. The CEO of those companies, his job is to perform for the shareholders. And if he doesn't do that, he'll be gone. They'll get someone who will. And I think in and around 2015, the guy, CEO of AstraZeneca, said he was going to, and I can't remember the exact language he used, but you could find it for yourself. He said he was going to turn the business around and generate whatever amount. He had serious projections for where they were going to go. And I suppose if you were of that mindset, and again, maybe if you were under the pressure to perform for your shareholders the way these people are, your moral compass might sway a bit, or your judgment, perspective, truth might be coloured somewhat. Yeah? We can understand that, I think. I think I can understand that anyway. And I suppose, how do you beat that issue of the patents expiring? And because there's the thing, you create a drug, it makes you loads of money, but it will expire. The patent you have on that will expire. But like you look at situations like that, and companies, it's not enough for a company to sell your product anymore. They have to hook you in. Like they need you to keep giving them money somehow. It's sort of a tool of neo-capitalism, and you see it with computers and cars and this sort of obsolescence of these things. Or like, I've got a tank of a computer over there, but you can't put the newest operating system on it because that's the way they designed them. And so I can't, and not from a hardware specification perspective, so I can't get the newest X, Y, and Z. So eventually that perfectly functioning piece of kit over there is going to be obsolete, and I will in turn have to buy another one. So it's not enough to get you, they got to hook you in, you know. And so what transpose that sort of thought onto, like, I could almost see it as maybe an epiphanic moment when this virus thing came up, where the guys are going, you know, the next big hit we've been looking for, you know, the next Nexium we wanted, it's the vaccine. And here's the thing, we could maybe set it up so this thing never goes away. We can maybe set it up so vaccines are just a part of our lives forever. And if that's the case, then we make extortionate amounts of money forever. It's almost like the industrial military complex. And I spoke there about Joe Biden and how that's just creating money for some, you know, person who creates the ammunitions and the weapons to kill human beings. Like, America can't afford not to wage war. America can't afford not to bomb Syria. Literally. They're that entrenched. The industrial military complex is such a pillar of their economy that they can't afford not to. And I suppose then, if that's what people are willing to do to make money, why wouldn't they be willing to, not necessarily, I'm not saying someone created a virus and put it out there in the world so we'd have to get the virus. I'm not going there. But I'm just saying then, when this thing comes up, why wouldn't someone whose job it is to perform for shareholders go, Jesus, that would be a great way to generate revenue sort of indefinitely with immunity. Because, you know, a war on terror, you know, we're engaged for nearly 20 years in a war on terror. And the beauty of that for the people engaged on the right side of that war is that it's never ending. And so as long as it's never ending, the situation needs you to pump it full of weapons, and you then make loads of money off that. And what if you could say, like, what if there was a war on viruses? What if the same sort of attitude was tacked on? Because we have all these variants, you know, we have all these situations, and so, because I'm almost 100% sure that this is what's going to happen as well. And I'm not basing this on any fact. I'm basing this on some level of intuition or instinct. But I'm pretty sure that when you get the vaccine, soon after, it's going to be like, no, because we've got these variants, you need to get this vaccine or this booster. We've modified the genes to deal with this variant, to, you know, the amino acids, the building blocks of protein that make up the microorganisms have changed so much that we need to give you this one and this one and this one and this one and this one. And I just feel like that's dangerous territory, because that's never ending. That's never ending, and that for me would be obviously set up to service these rich companies that create the thing you have to keep putting into yourself. And the other side of that is we don't know what that is. You don't. And again, with these emergency legislations, I think they're already putting in emergency legislation to say the booster shots, we've tested this initial shot and not even very adequately, so you don't have to test this one at all. It's a variant of this that we've already approved. That's crazy. From a health standpoint, I just think that's crazy. And then in this other way, I think that it's, you know, like what I've just said, I think that's potentially obviously set up to make money. And maybe that won't happen. But where the vaccine passports, I think, might become dangerous and might become a way in which everyone regrets it is that, let's say, for instance, you take the vaccine, you get the vaccine passport, and you're happy with the situation. Then 2.0 comes out, and you get that one, right, fair enough. And then, you need a booster for that one, you get that one, fair enough. And some way along the way, you go, oh, Jesus, do you know what? I feel like I want to get off this, right? I'm worried about it. I don't want to keep taking vaccines. If you got off the vaccine program, then your vaccine passport, or what you've done to gain your compliance tick, is totally out the window. Like, it's totally out the window. And then you, as the person who had full faith in the system to begin with, is stuck in a position, is stuck right back at square zero with the nutcases and the anti-vaxxers and the conspiracy theorists. And then again, so that's just like, it's just, my point is that it's complete dominion then. Do you know what do you understand what I'm saying? It's complete dominion. And even if it's somewhere along the line you don't go along at one point, get to the back of the queue. You can hang out with the dissidents and the nutcases over there. And yeah, I am worried about the state of the world. I have been for a while. I do think that the parameters that have been brought into, or I do think that things have gotten worse as a result of the coronavirus. I'm willing to accept that they are temporary measures to combat A, B, and C, but I also want to question every part of it. I want to show resistance to the narrative being fed to me by the likes of Leo Varadkar, Tony Holohan, Luke O'Neill, Micheál Martin, you know, the pharmaceutical companies, Bill Gates. I want to show resistance to these people because I think at a glance it's quite obvious that they're not aligned with me. And then I suppose on just a really, and this might be a totally trivial bullshit sort of thing to say, but on some sort of level, it looks terrifying to me. Like, it just looks too like a dystopian future. Like, and I was saying to my brother, I was like, because my mate played a gig there, and I saw a live performance of one of the best bands in this country on YouTube. It was New Secret Weapon. By far, I've seen them countless times before, and like sonically unmatched, you know. It's so vigorous, it's so amazing. Like, to see them live is to fucking, you know, is Dionysian. And I saw them, and I loved the guys as well, loved them. And big shout out to the boys, Trevor, Mark, Griffo. But I hated it. And I didn't hate it. Like, it was one of the best live stream performances I had seen. But I was just like, but that's maybe why it hit me so hard. Because I was like, I fucking love to see this band. This band makes your fucking organs rattle. And I'm looking at this sterilized nanny culture version of this thing, sitting at home on my own going, I'll come back when you've gigs. When gigs are back on, then I'm back in. But my point is, like, what I was saying to my brother is, like, I don't want people to come up ways to work within the constraints of this stuff, especially for things like gigs. I'm just like, don't do that. Concentrate on how we get back to where it should be, not on how we move within the remit. It doesn't make sense to me because it's not helping anyone financially. It's not saving the livelihoods of the people, you know, within the entertainment industry. And because there's a huge gap in that industry. You know, unless you're making proper money, you're probably making no money. And so, and again, I don't think how anyone in that sort of middle ground who made limited and rarefied amounts of money anyway, I don't see how doing a fucking live stream gig once a year from your living room is any sort of financial solution to the situation. I suppose just to tie it up, one thing I always keep saying, and I just want, and I've mentioned, and I want to say it again here, is that, oh yeah, because I'll just tie up what I was saying there. It's like, I don't like the look of people queuing outside to get into shops and there being traffic lights on the doors of retail businesses. I don't like the look of the death of our high street economy and local business, and that's only going to get worse in the next 12 months. And I don't like the look of a mass vaccine program for the world. It looks like a movie you'd be scared of. And maybe I'm being a whack job, but I'm certainly going to question it. I'm certainly going to show some level of resistance. And just to wrap it up, I consistently make a point to identify your enemy, and obviously there are malevolent people on a parochial level, but I think our real enemy, I think those differences that we have on our level could potentially be resolved and fixed if we focused our attention on what I consider to be our real enemy. And again, for all our healthy discourse last year, we didn't actually fucking achieve anything, and there were points in case given at the start of this podcast. And so, and not that we didn't achieve anything, but the fucking machine is still turning, you know? And so it's great, like, to create awareness on a parochial level, to all that stuff is great, you know, to build community, that is great. But the wheel is still turning there, and if we don't deal with that, it's going to go badly for us in a big way. And so I suppose, just to reiterate, you should, I believe, question the narrative of our government and the people they answer to, and you should show some resistance, I believe, to this situation. That's all I'm going to say. And most importantly, I love you all. Anyone who has watched, thanks so much for watching. Please throw a few comments down. I love it. Big shout out to Philly Morris, our first interactive comment. Yet again, good on you, Phil. So I would love to see comments. I think that we need to figure out a way to live in harmony. Not us and the likes of Leo Varadkar with a steak dinner box just like the rest of us. I mean, me and your neighbour, and the guy who you have to work in the factory with, or the person you work in a kitchen with, or that you pack shelves in Tesco with, the people who come into that Tesco, you know what I mean? Normal, everyday people should not be your enemy by default. In fact, we should be looking at ways to build each other up, strengthen our communities, mobilise and concentrate on potentially malevolent, powerful forces in our lives. I do love you all. I hope you love me. I'm trying to love myself. Peace.